Every year, I like to take a motorcycle trip from my home in Northern Virginia back to see my parents in Indiana, where I'm originally from. The first time I did it, I rode all the way there on my first motorcycle, which was a little Suzuki TU250. Things are definitely a little more comfortable now, though, on the Airhead. I got the bike ready and packed up down in the garage, got my earplugs in, rolled it out past the local wildlife, into the parking lot so as not to bother the folks living above with the smell of vintage startup. After a quick kick of the tires and a glance over to make sure everything was in order, it was time to hit the road. The weather was really nice as I set off. Sunny, not too hot, not too cool. Honestly, perfect road trip weather. I headed out past the usual local scenery, monuments, the Pentagon, and all the soulless glass monstrosities that house the various denizens of the consultancy and military-industrial complexes. Although I and my unfair bike are usually staunch advocates of eschewing the interstate in favor of the local and state roads, I did spring for a short stint on 66 just to get clear of the DC traffic and stoplights, the sort of road trip equivalent of a rocket boost to get you out of the atmosphere and into space where sailing is smoother. I hopped down the highway as far as Front Royal, where I stopped for a quick coffee and had a chatter with a couple who told me about some of their Sturgis misadventures. Would definitely like to go ride the Black Hills, but I'm not sure I would want to wander into town with all that, all in all. Back on the bike, it was all go west, young man. I got on 55 West, which eventually would turn into 48, which would be my workhorse pavement for the day, carrying me into the rolling hills of West Virginia. That perfect weather I had in the morning, though, not destined to last. As I crested the appropriately named Mount Storm, West Virginia, the sky was really starting to darken. For a brief moment, I saw light ahead and I thought that I might manage to skate through this weather, but immediately after that thought, I saw a bolt of lightning snake down from the sky, just out of the corner of my eye, and then moments later, a wall of rain arrived. Thankfully, I had just crossed a bridge, and I saw an entrance to a frontage road, and I took that, kind of sprinting for cover. It wasn't long after I pulled in under the bridge that the real rain arrived. At that point, I more or less settled into my new stint as a troll under the bridge, and just waited for the worst of it to pass. After about half an hour, the worst of it had passed over, and the rain wasn't too bad. So I put the rain suit on. It's not really any elegant way to do that. Double-checked all the luggage was secure, and set off again. Let's go! Riders on the storm. Once I got back on the road, though, I was greeted with a decidedly unsettling feeling. As it so happens, the road at this point turned to the kind where rain grooves run in the direction of traffic, so in the best of times, that is a squiggly feeling under the bike, but it was made worse, I think, by the fact that I just put a new set of Metzler Block C tires on my bike, and looking at the tread patterns, it seems to more or less match up perfectly with the rain grooves in the highway, which resulted in a very, very unstable feeling in the steering. You can't really tell from the video, but the steering was shaking pretty significantly. It kind of felt like a poor man's simulacrum of how the Dakar Rally guys just kind of surf on top of their bikes as they buck and kick about in the sand. Thankfully, it did not last too long though, and the road returned to single lane after a few miles, which is always my preference. I carried on through the winding roads and hills and hollers of West Virginia as the sky grew darker. I originally had planned to camp, but the forecast called for storms overnight, and I really wasn't in the mood to deal with it, so I settled for the classic Roach Motel in Parkersburg for the night. After an evening in a lumpy bed, I packed up the bike again and found that to my luck, it seemed the rain would actually hold off in the area till around lunchtime, so I would ostensibly be on the drive for the day with any luck. I set out of Parkersburg, past the Blennerhassett Hotel, over the Ohio River, past the smoking polymer factory on the banks of the water, and into Ohio for the bulk of the day's ride. The morning was gray, but dry, so I decided to skip down 50 for a bit to get to Ohio 555, or the Triple Nickel as it is affectionately known by motorcyclists. The local road runs from just outside Parkersburg, off Route 50, all the way up to Zanesville, Ohio, totaling about 65 miles of twists and turns. It goes through some very, very small towns, if you could even call them that, so amenities really aren't to be found on the ride, but the road itself is great, with plenty of curves and unexpected turns. It's a very technical ride. I definitely took things pretty easy since it had rained recently, and, well, I ride like an old man in the best of times anyway. After 43 miles of riding on this roller coaster, I actually decided to call it quits because the sharp hills and valleys were starting to make me a little queasy. A weak stomach, I know, but after an hour of the Triple Nickel, I was ready for a relatively straight road again. I hopped on Ohio 37 and skipped west for a bit out of town towards New Lexington, Ohio. I was hoping to grab a coffee, so I stopped at a local donut place, but their coffee maker was out of service, sadly. I got a cinnamon twist, settled for that though. As I ate my donut outside, I saw they had a sign exhorting people to go see the loony new conspiracy movie called Sound of Freedom, which is essentially like agitprop for the QAnon movement, so that was not a great feeling. Anyway, back on the road, I headed west once again. Still hankering for that coffee, I set my sights on the town of Lancaster, which was about an hour away, since there were a few open coffee places there for a little pick-me-up. After an hour of rolling Ohio farmland passed me by, I came upon the first couple blocks of the town, all blocked off, full of people. Turns out, I had by chance stumbled onto the annual Corvette Festival. Now, I do not give one shit about new cars. They do not interest me in any way. I could care more about the price of goats in Zambia than I do about how many horsepower some guy's middle-age crisis purchase puts out. But there was a collection of vintage cars from the 50s and 60s, and keeping something like that running, that I can respect. So there were a few really mint examples of old Corvettes, including one guy who had taken his all over the US and marked all his routes on his little map that he proudly displayed to any passerby. After poking around for a bit and getting some lunch, it was time to get back on the road. So at this stage I wasn't too far from my hometown, just a couple more hours on the tarmac. As I carried on, the land got flatter and flatter, a sign that I was getting closer to home. The town I'm from is true flatlander country. When there's soybeans planted instead of corn, you can see for miles. the sun got lower and I got closer, I decided to take one last little detour before I got home to swing by the old farmhouse that I grew up in just to see if it was still standing more or less. There were some folks hanging out on the porch, and I waved and carried on home for the last few miles.
Hi. Hi.
They finally got the porch repaired.
It is upright.
Yeah.
There were
Is that a
people
camera?
hanging out on it.
Is that a camera?
Yeah.
That's kind of wild.
Say hello.
I spent the first few days at home in Indiana with my parents before we went up to Michigan to see my sister and her family. I hadn't seen my niece in about 4 months or so we went up to see her and hang out for a bit, and also we went to the Meyer Gardens, which were very lovely. After a few days in Michigan, it was back to Indiana. My dad showed me a plane he was working on, which is a Hummels. It's powered by half a VW engine, so all in all, pretty similar to the bike that I rode in on. I can confirm to you that the love of flying is not genetically inherited, though, because I'm not super keen on it.
Visibility pretty good. I personally feel like I'm in a coffin right now, but...
Last I checked, though, I think that plane is pretty close to its inaugural flight. After a week that passed very quickly, it was time to get on the road again and get back to Washington. I got my stuff all packed up on the bike, said my goodbyes, and scooted off the driveway and onto US 40, the main street of America, pointed into the rising sun.
Cool. All right. I love you.
I love you.
I'll see you in a couple
watch
months.
on maps.
Yep.
On the way out, I passed a charming little donut shop where we would always stop by after church as a kid, and it's barely changed since those days. Out past the center of town and the courthouse and out into the agricultural flatlands of Indiana. My first stop of the day was Jeffersonville, Ohio. While there was a cute little cafe there where I stopped to get a bite to eat and a coffee, the main reason that I wanted to stop was to see a now under construction manufacturing plant that's going in there. It's a joint venture between Honda and LG Energy Services that's going to make battery packs for new electric vehicles. So right now there really wasn't much to see, but I still wanted to swing by because the place is emblematic of a lot of tumult and change in the American economy and its relationship with the world at the moment. Electric vehicles and the batteries that go in them are a really interesting nexus of conversations around industrial policy, climate policy, the labor movement, foreign direct investment. There's just a whole ream of swirling eddies and political currents that emanate from something as straightforward as a battery plant. I am probably boring you though, so I will share that about 30 seconds after I stopped on the side of the road to take some videos through the fence, a white pickup pulled up and the guy in there asked me exactly why I was taking pictures. I explained to him that I work at a research firm that does work related to EVs and was just kind of curious to see the plant, and that answer apparently satisfied his curiosity, and he told me that if I come back during the week they'd actually give me a tour. So kind of made me wish that I was coming through on a weekday. I would have actually really liked to poke around, but perhaps a reason to return someday. Back on the road, there were plenty of eastward miles ahead of me and only one way to count them down. As I puttered along back roads and state highways, it seemed like every small town in America was having a festival of some kind this weekend. Multiple towns I came in through had their main streets all shut down and lined with vendors and tents, with the whole area out in attendance. It was a beautiful day too, so it was nice to see. It does make sense that this time of year in an agricultural heartland would be chock full of festivals, as it's, I suppose, around the time that harvest season would have either been ongoing or wrapping up, depending on the crop, the season, and a million other variables. Anyway, I carried on, intent on making it to one more festival that I knew was going to be happening. I was headed for Point Pleasant, West Virginia for the evening. Why, you may ask, this old little town nestled on the Ohio River? Well, if you happen to see my last road trip video, you know that I love cryptid stories, and Point Pleasant is home to one of my favorite ones, the Mothman. So in 1966, the Mothman was first reported by some terrified local teenagers who claimed that they saw an apparition in the night of a large man with leathery wings and glowing red eyes that chased them through the night back into town. It apparently scared them so much that they went to the sheriff's office to report this horrifying experience, something that I don't think a kid would do if they were trying to just pull someone's leg. So after that, there were multiple sightings of the Mothman, these terrifying apparitions in the inky night, along with other paranormal experiences in the town. The town seemed to be kind of inclined toward these fearful experiences, or at least it was, until a real-life calamity happened there. In December of 1967, the Silver Bridge that crossed the Ohio River ended up collapsing after one of the eye-bars failed, and it sent 46 people to their death in the water below. No one ever saw the Mothman again after that, and the paranormal sightings in the town also slowed to a trickle. Was the Mothman a harbinger of the coming doom of these innocents? Did he herald terrible things to come? Or was he merely a figment of a perhaps chemically aided active imagination? Maybe the imposition of such a horrible reminder of mortality on the town simply crowded out the space for such frivolous stories. Well, regardless of what you think the answer is, the town has a Mothman festival every year, and it was great. People dressed up as moths, vendors of all kinds of fried and sugar-dusted foods, live music, and of course, photos with the iconic statue of the Mothman in the center of the town. After poking around and satisfying my love for the silly and the frivolous, I got back on the road for a short last little bit to my campsite for the night. I grabbed some supplies at the local grocery store, and then set off down the last few twisty roads to get to Forked Run State Park. I got my tent set up, had some dinner, and spent a bit of time reading before snapping a photo of my tent under the clear skies and going to bed. It may have been clear when I got in the tent, but it was not when I got out. I knew this was coming though, and I had already gritted my teeth for the suffering that was going to be this day on the road. I had already checked the weather, and I knew what I was contending with. Namely, the fact that there was a big old band of rain moving east at about the same pace as I would be to get home. Thankfully, the weather gods did me a favor by holding off the rain until I had at least packed up my camp, but by the time I had put my side cases back on and was putting my earplugs in, the rain started coming down. And it didn't really stop until, I don't know, maybe 30 miles short of home.
Oh, so wet. Woo! Smells gassy. Smells vintage. Ooh. Up on kids.
Riding in the rain normally isn't that bad, but it was fairly chilly on top of it and kind of in the low 50s. Normally mid-50s is pleasant enough, but if you're wet and puttering along at 60 miles an hour, it's downright unpleasant. I did stop for a brief respite at the Golden Arches for some coffee and greasy food, looking like a bit of a drowned rat. I didn't stop much for the last day of this trip, pretty much just pointed east and held the throttle. Going through West Virginia, I ended up missing a road intersection at one point, even though it was a fairly well-signed entrance to US 48. The reason I didn't see it is because I was essentially in a cloud. Visibility was so poor I had to really slow down and kind of put a turn signal on.
This is spooky as hell.
After getting on 48, the downward slope of the road really made it clear just how straight up cloud cover it was as I slowly came down out of it. Honestly, there's not much left to write home about for this trip. My GoPro ran out of batteries toward the end, and memories of warmer days got me through the last of the cold, wet ride. I made it home by around 4 p.m., which left plenty of time for a warm shower and some tea. Even though it was rainy half the time, I'm still glad I went. It was nice to get out of town and go see family, even if somewhat briefly. So don't forget, get out and ride. The bike's only as good as the people and places it takes you to see. Ride safe.
Okay, bye.